Good morning. Good morning. Today is August the 14th. Oh my goodness, it is already halfway through August, which means it is almost fall, which means that all the teachers of our church who are listening to this podcast, you have 2 more weeks. Then you're going back. Do you think that's like a... Anyway, I mean, at least my wife is. Today is August the 14th. Summer is almost over. However, we are just beginning this podcast, today's episode. Today we'll be talking about art. And as you know, I'm an art aficionado myself. And so I have a lot of things to say about everything, including art. Today, this morning, that is what we'll be talking about on the Dear Church podcast. Welcome to the Dear Church podcast, where we exist to fill your ears and your minds with the study of God to see the world as disciples of Christ. My name is Sam Yang.
And I'm Eugene Kim.
Wow. Wow. Yes, you are. Today, Pastor Eugene, we are talking about a very important topic, and that is the topic of art. So I guess first line of business would be, who is your favorite artist? Is it Rembrandt? Because you talked about Rembrandt a lot during the WW. Bum, ba-dum, bum. You talked about that.
No, I'm no art aficionado, so no, I can't really say I know enough. Yeah, isn't yours the Remonstrance?
I thought Brian had said that my favorite was Leonardo DiCaprio, but it's actually Leonardo da Vinci.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. No, my favorite artist is a guy named Bierstadt. He's a he's an American German nature painter.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so love him. And I think today I just wanted to get to, I guess, one of the underlying, I guess, main points of the talk this past Wednesday regarding art that you gave. And please correct me if I'm wrong, but what I took out of that was that beauty is objective. Art is to show and reflect the beauty that God has made to be good. And so beauty is objective. It's not only in the eyes of the beholder, but there is objective beauty. And there's also objective not beauty, because God has created it to be so. And all art and all beauty and all goodness is to reflect and point back to God, the creator. Is that a good gist, a summary?
A gist?
Is that the right word?
Summary?
Sometimes I just say words and hope it's right.
Yeah, a lot of times you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's my eruditeness, probably.
Yeah, it's your remonstrantness.
So I think one of the, we have reflection or I guess small groups after each talk, and one of the groups had an interesting conversation that I wanted to kind of talk about with you this morning, and it has to do with art, obviously, because that is our topic at hand, but it goes back into beauty. What is beauty? And I just was curious, does the Bible tell us anything about the standards of beauty that we are to watch out for? Because, in the world, standards of beauty change with every generation, as fashion changes, I think, with every generation. Besides maybe symmetry, I think everyone thinks symmetry is beautiful. But are there any biblical views or biblical standards that we can see and we can study of what is beautiful and what is not?
Yeah. I do believe that there is a standard, or an objective standard of beauty that we have been given, because it is God who admires and appreciates and is glorified by good art or by beauty. And so we want to make sure that, not all art is beautiful, right? And so not all the things that the world says is beautiful is also beautiful. What we want to get through is, in the Christian worldview, there is an objective or an objective standard of beauty. And it is God who is the one that creates that standard, because it's God who is the ultimate creator of all things beautiful. One way we see a standard is in nature. And this is something that I pointed out. And even you can see it in Psalm 19 and many, many other places in the Bible. But when God commands and commissions the tabernacle or the temple to be built, there's a lot of beautiful art that is supposed to be put in place.
Mm-hmm.
And so now, even as we are trying to revamp our church and, we are expanding, there's some construction that's taking place. We're trying to figure out what is beautiful. Is it truly, let's say, simply the minimalist, the most pragmatic, the most, bare bones kind of structure that we are seeing in a lot of churches today? Or should there be some sort of art? And then will that art be something that would glorify God, or would it, obstruct that glorification by becoming idolatrous? And so those are all challenges I think a lot of people face, and including us. And so I wanted to get into that subject of art to get that out there.
So I'm just curious though, because some people might think, well, art, especially paintings, all types of art, paintings and statues, and what other types of art are there?
Finger.
Play-Doh art. And so all types of art, however, are interpretive in the sense of, for example, when Bierstadt, my favorite painter, would paint nature, he is painting it through his own eyes, through his own interpretation, right? So how does art in itself then glorify God? I know that it's supposed to represent what God has made, but how does it really glorify God?
There is a standard, like I said, whatever is beautiful, whatever is noble, whatever is pure. All those things play into a piece of art, a work of art being, beautiful or not. It's not simply just the masses appreciating it. It's really understanding we have a wonderful creator, an artistic creator, who wants us to also imitate and mimic what he has done. And so obviously we're not painting the trees green, but we can paint a picture of the trees being green and things like that. And those are things that we really get to appreciate. It glorifies God because even the artist's work points to even, maybe gives us a deeper value of what nature is like when we see a painting of nature like you appreciate from Remonstrant. And we keep on saying that, but the Remonstrants were it's a group that were, it had nothing to do with art.
Member of the Arminian Party.
Yeah, they're just a bunch of Arminians that were against the Calvinists. Yeah. Anyway, but because you mentioned it last week, I thought it was funny. But then those standards are actually given, but not only the standards are given by God, true artistic, talent is also given by God. We'll see, like, when God imbues talent and skill, a gift of the Holy Spirit, the charisma, right, to the craftsmen of the temple and the tabernacle, it is a supernatural gifting. That's what he wants. He wants it to be beautiful. And so a lot of times people now define art differently, which is not the Christian worldview, but it could be a secular or paganistic worldview, meaning art is art if it elicits a response. And that's why we have all these content creators that want to just elicit a response. So we'll have a piece of art that would shock or horrify or even glorify not God, but glorify sin. Yeah. And so those are things where we saw an example of Piss Christ, where an artist, quote unquote, would have, what he did was urinate in a jar and then put a crucifix in it. Mm-hmm. And then he got incredible notoriety, not because the piece was beautiful in the sense, it was because it elicited this horrific response, especially from Christians who, would be horrified at just a sight like that.
How do you, you brought up an example of Piss Christ, and I think that one is especially easy for Christians to tell, hey, I think this is bad art. This is probably bad, because it's literally desecrating the holy. How do you discern then between good art and bad art? And I think on top of that too, I'm just curious because at least in the conversations that I've had, there aren't a lot of people, at least that I know, that really are crazy about art. I know just one. And you brought this up at the beginning of your talk as well, that art is important and that Christians should appreciate it. Is it wrong for Christians not to appreciate art or to not really care about it? Is it that important?
Well, I'm not saying you should go to the museum like every week or something to that effect. I'm saying that when you see a good piece of art and it glorifies God, you are also blessed by that piece of art. People who would have visited the temple or the tabernacle would have been wowed, various degrees, obviously, but they would have been wowed nonetheless with what was built, the structures that were in place, the frames. Even the frames in 1 Kings 6 that Solomon would have put in would have been, wow, this is definitely something different. This is something that stands out and glorifies God. So even the lay person, if they could appreciate something like that, would bring us to a place of understanding that God is ultimately the beautiful creator. And speaking of which, let me just give you an example. Michelangelo's David.
Oh, Michelangelo. I know him. Yeah.
Yeah. He's a cool guy.
What's his first name?
Mikel.
That's a good one.
Anyway, his sculpture, to the lay person, maybe at first glance in our society today, we kind of make crass comments about David being naked.
Yeah.
But further study of the statue shows the genius of this sculpture. I pointed out some of the stuff, but let me point out something in addition to what I pointed out on the WWE session. It's that if you look at David, he is naked, but then if you look at the way David has been sculpted, it's not a crass nudity.
Right.
I think that's really important, and that's very, very difficult to depict. It really is, because let's say nudity in general. The Bible talks about nudity and equates it with shame, with something not good. But at the same time, the human body is beautiful. The human body is something that God has created that we could give glory to God for. And so, in the very least, we understand that sometimes we ought to, well, not sometimes, I should say that if nudity is depicted in a crass way, like pornographically, that definitely is evil. Nudity can be depicted with shame as it's shown to us in the Bible. However, the reason why I like Michelangelo's David is because the nudity there doesn't depict anything crass. In fact, part of that whole thing is about looking at the body and seeing how it's ready to fight, how it is in perfect form, and there's nothing lacking even in the counterpose that David is standing in. And so he's ready to lunge. He has the stones in his right hand, the sling is in his left hand, and he's staring out at, obviously what is presumably to be the Holy Spirit. And so one of the things that we actually see is in that sculpture, the nudity isn't the biggest part. It's really showing something beyond the nudity, meaning he is unencumbered by anything and he is ready solely for the fight. The only thing he's equipped with is what he needs to defeat Goliath, which is materially, it is, the stones and the sling, but you could see his resolve. And then in a Christian sense, you would be able to almost see his faith as palpable in a sense. It's there. And so if you continue to look at the statue or the sculpture of David, you would get to appreciate these nuances that the artist put in. Now, I take that as an example because there are clear wrong depictions of nudity that you could put out, not just crass, but just evil or for some shock value or something like that. Or just some really, really paganistic way of viewing nudity, thinking that is beautiful or artistic or something like that.
Yeah.
But that's not how David was portrayed, in my opinion, obviously. Obviously, there might be some people that might disagree, saying any form of nudity is bad. But that's not necessarily how I see it. I think almost all forms of nudity are bad if it's depicted, but not all forms is the point. And so Michelangelo was able to take that one sliver and really point it out, because we even know in the Greco-Roman era, people used to wrestle in the Olympic Games, but they will wrestle naked because they wanted to be unencumbered by anything.
Mhm,
And now,
mhm.
even today, in our society, we have these, I don't know, these one piece. Yeah, they're just really form fitting, very
Singlets.
thin singlets,
Yeah.
right? That people wear because it, in fact, would represent that kind of unencumberedness that you can't grab anything. Nothing will hinder you from winning the prize.
I think it's really interesting that you bring up nudity because, as you were kind of giving that answer, I was just thinking about how I don't think in today's world there is a clean representation of nudity anywhere, because anytime that there is nudity represented, it's always in a lustful manner on TV, on the screen, or on a movie or whatever it is, on Netflix, whatever it is. And it always has to do with sex. Always.
Yeah, there's lust, there
Yeah.
is shame,
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
disgrace, there's immodesty. I think that's a big one. And so when we depict women on the screen, because now, a major art form in our society today is the movies, is anything on the
Yeah.
screen.
Yeah.
It's always some, naked or semi-naked, semi-nude form of a woman.
Mhm.
Now even men in
Mhm.
2023, right? And that is a very shameful and disgraceful way of depicting the human body. We're no longer ashamed of what we should be ashamed by. We're no longer modest
Yeah.
with our body parts, but we want to continue to show more and more. So it's not to win the goal or a prize. It's actually
Yeah.
to promote lust, it's to promote immodesty, it's to promote disgrace. So in a sense, it is trying to call what is ugly beautiful and what is beautiful ugly. So
Yeah.
modesty is something that people look down on. What
Yeah.
are you, some sort of nun, or what do you call those people with their own enclaves?
Monk.
Punk,
Cult.
or the
Cult.
Amish,
Amish.
right? What are you, some sort of Amish? You
Yeah.
want to wear your dress and skirts all the way to your ankles and things like that.
Yeah.
Because modesty is looked and frowned down upon today. And so even in the Bible, it says you should dress modesty, and what you should promote. This is, Paul is talking to Timothy in regard to women, is they should be adorned by their good works,
Yeah.
by grace, by things that are good and pure and holy. That's what they should be adorned by, their good character, not what they dress in, whether it's braids or gold in their hair and things
Yeah.
like that, or immodest dress. But you see today, it's the complete flip, where it's all about what you can put on as makeup and what you can put on as dress that really defines your beauty as a woman. This is a terrible way of trying to live out the gospel. If you are indeed a Christian and you think that the way you become beautiful is through your physical dress instead of your spiritual dress, then you've got it all backwards.
So during the WWE talk, you talked about Philippians chapter 4, verse 8. And I want to read that for us. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. And I know we mentioned this before too, I think in the Pornea episode that we had a couple months back, but today it almost seems like there aren't a lot of wholesome media like shows, posts, whatever it might be, and to the point where when something wholesome does come up, it's a surprise and we say, oh look, this is actually really wholesome. If we have to comment on it, it means that nothing else out there is wholesome. So I'm just wondering, how as Christians, how do we discern between what is good, what is true, what is honorable, what is beautiful? How do we discern between those things? Because when we watch something, when we listen to something, we're always consuming, right? We're always thinking about it. Right? So how do we discern between what is good, what is honorable, what is pure, what is lovely versus what is not, especially today?
Yeah, I think we are the media that we are looking or witnessing come
Yeah.
up. We're whittling it down now. There's nothing good on TV. There's
No.
nothing good on your social media. It's being whittled down further and further. And I think it is, or should, give the Christian pause to recognize that as much as it gets whittled down, because, what was it, like a few years ago or something like that, or even in recent days, what was that show, The Chosen? It was like finally a good show to watch. And The Chosen is just a depiction of Jesus that's extra biblical. So they do things that are not in the Bible that the writers are imagining, which is very dangerous to say the very least, and outright heretical in the other side of that spectrum.
Mm.
So you got from dangerous to heretical. Why would you watch that show? So people are like, oh, no, it's good and wholesome. And, no. Like, we already have a depiction of Jesus that is true and right. And so I'm saying it's getting whittled down to the bare bones.
Yeah.
And what is, absolutely foundational. And people are hopefully seeing that we have to go back to the word. We have to recognize once again that we are at a time where we need to go back to sola scriptura. And something that has escaped many contemporary Christians and their churches is that very foundation of what was the Protestant Reformation, which was going back to what the early church was about. It was about the Holy Scriptures being our ultimate authority.
Mm-hmm.
Not your own mind, not some other outside institution, but the Scriptures. They are our rule and standard. And so in the same thing for beauty, the Scriptures are our rule and standard. So even when we are looking at certain characters in the faith, it's not just simply me making up, I think Samson was a cool guy because of this. He was pretty big. But you're looking at the Scriptures to see what the Scriptures are saying verse by verse. We're seeing chapter by chapter what the Bible is saying about certain characters like Barak or Samson or Jephthah or David or Samuel or all these other exemplars of the faith. And then we are learning from that. And they are depicted in a way which you could see, this is beautiful and this is not beautiful. This is beautiful and this is not beautiful. And those are things that we get to see directly from the Word of God. And that's how we keep our standard. We continue to go back to the Word. We continue to read the Word. And I think that's why the greats were great, like Michelangelo or Rembrandt or whoever is great. Like the vast majority of the great artists, they were Christian. And I did mention what Rembrandt would do is he would read this, whoever he was going to draw, he would read them over and over and over again. And then he would start making sketches like, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, right? 80 sketches. And then come down with one that he will land on, whether it's the portrait of Jeremiah or portrait of the prodigal son or all these other portraits that he made, paintings that he made. And he would encapsulate their entire life into this one painting. And that's what we could appreciate, because this one painting is a moment in time that's frozen, but it tells many a tale within that one painting. And that's what we get to really appreciate. And so these greats, I think, were great. Like if you visited the Sistine Chapel.
Yeah.
And you saw it's still great hundreds of years later because of what it pointed to, because there was a standard of beauty, or there is a standard of beauty that innately we get to recognize because we have the image of God. And, we could even go back to what it means to have the image of God, to appreciate beauty, appreciate nature, appreciate art. Is there any other being or life form in creation that stands in front of a piece of art and truly appreciates the art for its beauty? And no, I think that's one of the key elements of having the image of God, is that when we see something beautiful, it takes us, or it makes us take a step back. And I think that's beautiful. And, art is one of those beautiful, beautiful things, whether it's in, a physical depiction or a musical depiction. Those things are just amazing for us to witness. And then at the same time, you see, if I take the example to music, we use that beauty that we've been given, and then we turn it back to glorify God. I think that's the beautiful thing. So whatever art that we see or appreciate, or we even get to participate in its creation, because there's a lot of artists in our church, we use it to glorify God, just as if you were talented in music. You receive music, you recognize its beauty, but you actually in turn use it to glorify God. And that's one of those things me personally, I really appreciate people that are good artists. Like in our church, I really do appreciate them. And dancers. I really appreciate good dancers. I think it's because I can't draw and I can't dance. So one of those things is when I see other people with the ability to draw and the ability to dance, I do appreciate that a lot.
I'm wondering, I want to appreciate art. How do I do that? How do I better appreciate God's creation? How do I better appreciate the good things that God has made? How do I do that better?
Yeah, I think there's something innate in us that helps us appreciate, but also at the same time, since you mentioned it, in Philippians 4:8, it's something that we are commanded to think about. Think about these things. You're supposed to meditate on these things. So you're supposed to come to a place of deeper appreciation of what is true beauty, of what is noble, of what is pure, what is good. And so we talked about what is good, what is true, what is
Yeah.
beautiful. They're all in line. And so, what is good, what is true, and what is beautiful, these are things that we think about. And if you continue to think about something, that's what you also have conversations about.
Mm-hmm.
It starts to affect your prayers and your worship as well because you're continuing to think about the beautiful things. If you don't think about this and you think about other things, then you actually don't have anything to engage in, even in conversation. For example, just this morning, as right before we recorded, a bunch of the brothers were talking about, some new golf equipment they got.
Oh,
So let's just say in golf, there's a lot of beauty to the sport of golf. I do appreciate it more and more every day. But let's say that's what you're thinking about. That's what you are spending your money. That's where your thoughts are. You're thinking about your swing. You're thinking about the new clubs you got. You're thinking about the course that you're about to go to. You're thinking about the people that you're going to play with. You're thinking about, how you're going to, exercise, get fit, or maybe prepare for this excursion for 18 holes, those kind of things. It actually comes out in your conversations. And that's what people are talking about because that's what they're thinking about.
Yeah.
In the same way, when you're commanded to think about what is noble, pure, beautiful, things like that. So to boil it down to what is good, what is true, and what is beautiful, you're commanded to think about these things. And you do, that's what's going to come out of your mouth. What's going to come out of your mouth are things that are good, things that are true, and things that are beautiful. That's what we really want to focus on. Isn't that a wonderful thing that God has given us? He has given us not just this command to follow, dragging our feet, but it's because it's also good for us. And I really like that as we trust in God, we see that it glorifies God and it really is good for us. One of those things. And it's a wonderful thing if I have a conversation with someone that we are talking about what is good, what is true, what is beautiful, as opposed to we continue to waste our time talking about what is evil or reveling in evil or just the prospect of evil, like lusting and, just being angry or bitter or envious and things like that. What a terrible way to spend our time. So I think by us going back to the standard, by going back to what the Bible is showing us, having our minds now shaped by what the Bible and the Word of God is saying instead of what the world is trying to show, we actually become more and more sanctified by the power of the Holy Spirit and by the truth in His Word.
I want to talk about, I guess, a little bit more about beauty, just in general. But before we go there, I'm curious. What's your favorite art museum? Because,
I've been to a lot, but I'm not really an art connoisseur. I'm not a aficionado by any means. And if people invite me, I go.
Yeah.
So people invite me to the Met or the MoMA for a particular exhibition, I actually go. And I try to understand the best I can. But to be honest, my favorite times were actually when I was in Europe and visiting,
The Louvre?
the Louvre.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or, going to Florence, and seeing the art there.
Yeah.
But I still remember visiting the Vatican and the Sistine Chapel. That actually stood out to me still. And, how when you were being moved from hallway to hallway, how they said, don't take any pictures of the Sistine Chapel. And then everybody was taking pictures.
Yeah, no one cares.
No one cares.
Yeah.
But then they keep on saying, don't take pictures. So I found that kind of funny. But, that's one of those things that I'll remember. I really do appreciate that kind of art. Maybe I'm just an old head. It's kind of old school.
Yeah.
Obviously, I wasn't alive when it was painted, but
Mm.
as time goes on, I do appreciate art that is beautiful, and also something that is beautiful that points to something, as it points to the glory of God, how beautiful God is and His creation. I get to appreciate that a little more.
Yeah.
What
You know,
about you? Since you asked, I'm sure you want to know.
I
I
think
mean, I'm sure the people want to know your favorite museum.
I do have to say, so MoMA and Met, it's all great. It's all great, but I have to say, it the European boys, it hits different. They're so good at art. I think the best museum that I actually went to was probably the art collection of the Vatican. That was crazy to me. I think especially sculptures really are crazy to me because they take a block and then they just whittle away at it and it becomes that thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like I can't even make that with Play-Doh probably. No, as a matter of fact, I for sure cannot. But these dudes did it with marble. And if you mess up a little bit, you're going to get executed or something. But they're so good at art. But I wanted to get into the topic of beauty in general. And I think this was a conversation of interest that one of our groups had this past Wednesday. And it was just, are we to desire beauty? It seems like in the Bible, whether we look in Proverbs or even in 1 Peter chapter 3, it seems like beauty is something that is vain. Beauty is something that we are not to focus on. Beauty is something that almost is secular, and over focusing on it is a sin. So is it wrong as a Christian to desire to be beautiful? How do we view beauty in the human sense rather than something we're witnessing? How do we view that?
Well, I think if it is vain and we call it beautiful, then in a sense we should recognize that it is not true beauty. But then we can also, I think that the thing about aesthetics
Yeah.
is that when you see that something is beautiful outwardly, that is really pointing to something that we are really longing for. So
Mhm.
even sin, if we are to take, let's say, sex, for example,
Mhm.
used correctly, it glorifies God. Used correctly, it is fruitful and good for humanity. Used improperly, it is dangerous and destructive to humanity. But sex in itself isn't good or bad. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
So aesthetics is a wonderful thing. It depends on how we use it. So you can use your gift of making something really aesthetically pleasing and let it still be vain,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
And I think that is the purpose here that I really want to get across. If you have this gift of making things look good, so you could take a block of marble and then, for you, it's not a block of marble. You see something trying to get out and you quote unquote whittling away
Yeah.
isn't creating something. To these great artists, what they would say is they're just taking the thing that was in the marble out. And so the way they see things is different, I suppose, but the
Yeah.
way they can actually have the skill set to bring it out is what we also appreciate. That's why they are the greats.
Right.
But when we talk about aesthetics and we want to go, so this is the debate. When we want to go into a worship setting, that's what it really is talking about. Do we want aesthetically pleasing worship settings? And, Puritans, I think, would say no. They would say that we need to keep it really bare bones. So none of our structures will be in any way idolatrous or iconoclastic, right? Those are things that or iconodualistic, right?
Mhm.
Those are things where we don't want to put our minds and our focus on. So it's not just Puritans. A lot of Presbyterians wouldn't want a lot of art inside their main sanctuary. And so that's what we see here, right? A lot of Presbyterians don't have that. If anything, it's reserved for one specific place. And I'm talking about modern day Presbyterians. But it wasn't always the case. If you even look at like great and old Presbyterian churches, there were sculptures and pieces of art in there. And so those are things where we don't want to we don't want to succumb to the warnings that our forefathers had given us, right?
Yeah.
So we don't want visual images, and we don't want to be like iconoduals, and we want to venerate images and things like that. That's not what we want to do. But at the same time, do we want to go as far as obliterating any form of depiction or image?
Yeah.
I think that is the question. And that's the struggle that we have. I think that's what we want to, if the debate's there, that's great. But, let's have the debate. Let's talk about it. But for me in particular, I think if it is idolatrous, then we must take it out.
Mm-hmm.
And it could be to whatever degree. Let's go back to Michelangelo's David.
Yeah.
It still can be crass to certain people. They might look at Michelangelo's David and just see that he is just frontal nudity, like boom, he's nude, and just kind of snicker at his nudity, because they don't appreciate that. And they might just buy, for example, keychains of him being nude or something like that, and give it to their friends or something. And I think that is a misunderstanding, obviously, of the statue.
Mm-hmm. But
if that's all that they can see in David's statue, then maybe it's good that for a time you don't have Michelangelo's statue or sculpture in front of people who can't appreciate it. Perhaps it takes a little growth. They need to think about it more, and then they'll start to appreciate what it truly meant. So yeah, I do think in some ways there is a subjectivity to the art that is put in certain sanctuaries. So that's why I said for a time being, in our sanctuary, we will have it completely bare bone, except maybe one or two decorations, seasonal or sermon series wise.
Yeah.
We won't even have a cross there because we don't want to depict anything that might lead to idolatry.
Mm-hmm.
But if the congregation is educated enough and they understand enough, then I think introducing slowly symbolism in art is a great thing, because symbolism and art, your eyes are drawn to it. So our eyes are naturally drawn to beauty. And if you are taught what that beauty is symbolizing, then, and if the symbolization is toward the glory of God, then you would glorify God technically, yeah?
Yeah.
So that's actually what I really want to get to, is we don't want to be completely radical in the sense because our sanctuary should kind of, we go out from the sanctuary into the world. So if our sanctuary is completely bare bone and dry and minimalistic, then when we go out into the world, then how do we handle the world? My concern is people will go out into the world and they won't know how to discern between what is beautiful and what is ugly, because in the sanctuary you didn't see any of that. There is no teaching there.
Yeah.
And so I want there to be a certain level of teaching, but at the same time, it needs to be introduced in a way where it would be edifying to the people. So in that sense, beauty isn't subjective, but it's subjective to the degree where people must be taught to appreciate beauty for what is, underneath the symbolism.
When I was a younger lad, a person asked me, "Why do you go to the gym so much? Aren't you a pastor's kid?" And that struck me a little bit, because I was thinking, what does me being a pastor's kid have to do with me going to the gym? And that's when I realized that for certain people, looking a certain way is not holy. So looking muscular, looking shredded, looking ridiculously just dialed in is not something that you would expect from a holy person, because a holy person should what? Not be spending time on quote unquote vain things. And so in that regard too, when we want to look a certain way, when we want to look beautiful and we view beauty in this way, is that a wrong thing for Christians to want to look beautiful?
Could be. Let's go back to our basis.
Yeah.
Beauty doesn't stand alone in what we're talking about. Aesthetics do not stand alone. There are two things that come before when we talked about it. Number one, is it good? Number two, is it true?
Oh.
And number three, is it beautiful?
Yeah.
Those things are all in line. So just because something is quote unquote beautiful doesn't mean it's a good beauty. it doesn't mean it's a true beauty.
Mm.
So we need to make sure we have those three things in line when it comes to art, when it comes to any kind of aesthetics. Even if you're building your body to look a certain way, you have to ask yourself, is there goodness in it? Is there truth in it? And if there is no goodness or truth, then you know what you're ending up is not a beauty that will last. It is the beauty that is fleeting, like it says in Proverbs 31. That's the beauty that we need to be wary of. And true beauty is what lasts. So it needs to be good, it needs to be true, and it needs to be beautiful. Those three things need to be in line. And the same way, when I'm just talking about pure aesthetics, it shouldn't be ugly then. So we shouldn't have a sanctuary that is ugly because we just want to be like, oh, I don't want any kind of symbolism to take away and then, give any credence to some kind of idolatrous form in the worship setting. And so you make things ugly. That actually takes away from worship too. And so we can't have that either. So those three things must be in line. So now with that basis, let's go to working out and you sculpting your own body. Is it true? Is it good? Is it beautiful? And if that's the case, then it isn't sheer vanity. That's not the reason why we do it. And it could be that even Christian brothers or sisters are only doing it for vanity.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that they would need to repent of, because we don't want to do that. We want to make sure that this is good, this is true. And so there are things that you would think about. You would think about functionality. You think about health. You would think about, does this benefit anybody else? You would think about all these things because that comes in line with goodness, with truth and beauty. So if it's simply to garner glory for yourself, then you know that is a vain beauty, right?
So how would you then discern what is true and good? So for example, we use working out. What about makeup? What about jewelry? What about cosmetic surgeries? How do you discern what is true and what is good and what is beautiful? What do you mean by that when we are
What about
to think through those
tattoos?
things? Yeah, what about tattoos? Body art or ink, as they say.
Who's they? You keep on saying they.
I don't know. It's just a
Name
they
names
out there.
Yeah.
So how would you, how do we think? So if I want to work out to get humongous biceps, already do, but let's just say in this scenario I don't. How do I think through? Is this true? Is this good? What do you mean by that?
Well, if people who don't bodybuild, I don't think really understand, but even like a novice, once you get into it, you start appreciating the science or the art of bodybuilding, of working out and things like that. It's not simply going to the gym. That's not what bodybuilding is. There is a level of understanding your body, appreciating it, stretching it to its limits, knowing about recovery, knowing about growth, what you put into your body, what you can expel from your body, how you can expend energy in your body. And that all becomes a thing where you start to appreciate how the body is built. For me, I once read this article saying the best bodybuilders are former nerds, right? Like video gamers, because when you play video games, like you wouldn't know, but if you're good at video games, what gamers would do is they would study all the formulas of how the devs would have put in the game. So you would actually have mathematical equations on what a certain character could produce or output, whether you're a healer or a tank or DPS and things like that.
Yeah.
And so those are things that people would study, and they would write out these equations saying, if I put this combo in, and then you translate that kind of science and this kind of dedication, devotion, the meticulousness of what you would put into being the best at the game now into bodybuilding. And there is a science to it, like how many reps you should do for optimal growth or optimal shredding, things like that. And so people would recognize there's also math involved in bodybuilding. And so you see the really, really good novices, the people that are there, they have notebooks there. They're writing down, they're recording how many reps they do. They're recording how many reps they want to get at the weight that they want to do. It's not just random things they put up, right? And then as you get better and better, perhaps you could use a notebook. You might not need a notebook. That's beside the point. Now you have that formula in your head.
Yeah.
You have a regimen that you have. I need to go to the gym at least this many times and spend at least this many hours, total in a week doing this body part or something like that. And so you get to appreciate that. It's like appreciating art too. There's a lot of beauty in appreciating certain sports and certain things where you get to see your body develop aesthetically as
Mm.
well as functionally. So I don't knock aesthetics in bodybuilding at all,
Mm.
but it depends on your goal. You know, if your goal is to lift 450 pounds over your head, then you're not really thinking about bodybuilding at all. You know, I saw this one video of a guy with a total dad bod in the beach, and they interviewed him. What's the most that you could lift over your head? He's like, and he was Kazakhstani. He's like, maybe like, minimum 260 kilograms.
Oh,
And he happened to be
What?
the Olympic lifter for Kazakhstan.
oh my goodness.
But he's a total dad bod.
Yeah.
You can't, like, looking at him, you couldn't see it because that's the goal. The goal for him wasn't to be simply aesthetically pleasing, but to lift that a certain amount of weight over his head. So that's really what I'm trying to get at. What's goodness, what is truth, what is beautiful, all come together to provide a goal for you. What's the goal? And so when you're saying, is this good or bad? It depends on your goal, because two
Yeah.
people can be working out at the gym,
Oh yeah.
but they could have completely different goals. One could
Yeah.
be evil. He's working out so he can murder people.
Mhm.
Let's say he wants to be strong enough to murder people. And the other person could be, I want to be strong enough to potentially protect my family from people like the other guy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the goals are different. And I do believe men to a certain degree should be healthy and should be strong.
Yeah.
I think that to a degree, that's an absolute must. And when you're not, and you're just lazy and you're out of shape, that affects not just the potential of intruders in your home, but that actually affects the culture of your home. And so we start to recognize there is truth to what I just said. There's beauty, but there's goodness to, that needs to be applied to the goals that we have.
So the reason why I even brought up working out is because I know a lot of men in our church, especially, do enjoy the sport of weightlifting, working out. And I think that's a good thing to reflect on: is why are we doing it? What's our goal? Is it purely for buys for the guys? Is that what it is? But I think another point that I wanted to also hit is, how do we then move on from this, which has some physical benefits, like health benefits, right, to jewelry, fashion, cosmetic surgeries, like getting braces. I got braces when I was a kid. It didn't really do anything for me physically. I could still eat, but it was a cosmetic surgery. How do we handle stuff like this? Also, side note, you shared with the WWE audience this past Wednesday that you have certain colors that you don't see as well as other people. Someone texted me during the talk, "Are you colorblind?" And I was very confused. I said no. And then they were pointing to the fact that my outfits do not match. So they were convinced that I was colorblind.
Mm-hmm.
So that was offensive.
Mm-hmm.
But speaking of fashion and outfits, is how much effort and thought and attention should we be placing on these things, especially because the world puts such a high priority on aesthetics just for the sake of aesthetics? How do Christians kind of weave through that?
Yeah. Aesthetics come because something is deeper
Mm-hmm.
in its beauty. I think that's something that I recognize as time goes on. Why is something truly beautiful? Because there's something deeper than just the physical outward appearance. That's why we really do appreciate certain. But if it's simply aesthetic, then it could be vanity and it could be pride.
Mm.
That's something that we have to watch out for. And so if you really want to make sure that you're not going in that direction, again, I challenge you to look at your goals and to put that up against the word of God. Because if your aesthetics doesn't have modesty or self-control, like it says in 1 Timothy chapter 2, if you're not adorning yourself in respectable apparel, but you're simply looking for something that is the most, aesthetically pleasing of 2023,
Yeah.
then something is wrong with your heart. Again, Jeremiah says the heart is deceitful above all things, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so you can't simply go with what makes you emotionally driven. Emotions are there, but you are not driven simply by emotions. And so if that's the case, that's where we really see pride take control of your life instead of the word of God. So we want to make sure that's there. How do I make sure that I'm not going in those, in
Yep,
the direction
yep.
of pride? Again, I think the Bible continues to teach us what is proper. And if we're just simply talking about First Timothy chapter 2, you could read actually from verses 9 to 11.
1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 9 to 11 reads, "Likewise also that women should adorn themselves in respectable apparel with modesty and self-control, not with braided hair and gold or pearls or costly attire, but with what is proper for women who profess godliness with good works. Let a woman learn quietly with all submissiveness."
Yeah, and so those are things that we are seeing is commanded for women, and not just to women under Timothy, but to all the churches. And so when we see this command to make sure that the women are adorned with respectable apparel, modesty, self-control, not with simply outward appearance, I think that's something that we ought to take very seriously. It's the first thing. So your adorning is what people see. It's the first thing that people will see. Is it simply the outer dress that you have, or is it your character? And so if you have that goal in mind, then your outward dress is something that should point to your character, which should point to glorifying God. And so that's how we make sure that our outward dress is okay. If it's simply like, what is today's culture? Like yoga pants. If it's simply comfort, then
Yeah.
isn't that vanity? Let alone it being inappropriate for most occasions, yoga pants. If not all. I don't know.
Wait,
But
can you repeat that? Because I only dress for comfort.
yeah, if it's simply for comfort, then you're not thinking about glorifying God. You're only looking to satisfy yourself, right? So you can dress in a comfortable manner,
Yeah.
but you shouldn't dress simply for comfort. Comfort
Gotcha.
cannot be your ultimate priority when you dress.
Right.
It can be comfortable, but that dress should point you to you professing godliness. That's the point. And I think this is a big thing for women too, especially because their dress is something that they use to identify themselves with. So the way you dress shows the world to a degree who you are. It's absolutely true. Look at even the LGBTQ community. Women dress and put their hair in a certain way to signify to the world they are of this proclivity or this inclination or this sin, whatever it is, right? And they celebrate that with their dress. The same thing is true, except it's opposing the ways of the world, because women of the word should dress in a way that professes not their quote unquote sexual identity, but would profess their godliness. And how do you do that? With modesty, with good works. And so obviously you're not going to go naked. So how do you dress then? If you're not going to dress in a way that is in a worldly way, you dress in a way that would point to those things about your godliness. So if it's simply for comfort, then you are not dressing to point to godliness. You are not. And so in the same way, if I simply wanted comfort, then I think that's one of the mistakes that I think Francis Chan had early on in his ministry. He would say, "I don't know why I have to dress in a suit." I think that's kind of hypocritical and almost legalistic. And so he would go out into the stage and the pulpit with a t-shirt and jeans because that's how he normally dresses every day.
Yeah.
And saying, our worship to God should be every day, not just this one time. But don't you see that Sunday service is different? And that's why he's gone that way. I think it's because of dress. And, you can disagree with me on this one too. You can say, actually, there's other things. But he went from the church service should be like that every day of our life to now churches aren't important. You should just have house churches, things like that. That is not true. That's And he's saying this is biblical. People used to have house church. Yeah, because if they went out, they got killed and murdered.
Yeah.
They had no choice. But if they could,
Yeah.
where did they go? They went to the synagogue. They had people gather in outside places. They went to the promenade and things like that because they knew that going outside to worship God is a God honoring, glorifying thing. So I think he's absolutely wrong on that one, even from, 10, 20 years ago. But yeah, is there a reason for you to dress a certain way when you're at the pulpit? Absolutely. Absolutely. And so when you would dress for the pulpit, would you dress where comfort is your main priority? No, no one would think that. And I would say in the same vein, take it on the flip side. If you're listening to the word of God and you're there to make sure that you listen properly and your manner of listening is your worship to God, would you dress in a way where you're most comfortable only? Comfort could be a factor, but it's not the factor or definitely not the only factor. It can be one of the things that you think about, You don't want to dress so stiffly that you can't even move or breathe or something like that to that effect. That might be overdoing it. But comfort cannot be the main point of you dressing. So there is a goal to me going outside. And if the goal is, let's say, I need to spend outside, I'm not meeting anybody, I'm not doing anything, my main purpose is to study, then comfort can be a purpose because I want to study. I don't want anything to hinder my studies. The same thing going back to the wrestling and the Olympics and things like that. You don't want your outer clothing to hinder you from your goal. And so comfort can be something there. And that's why when we're at home, we dress comfortably. You don't wear a tuxedo at home. But when you go outside, you dress a certain way because there is a purpose for you going outside.
Yeah.
And so, comfort cannot be the only or the major decision or the factor in your decision of dressing when you go outside. Because when you go outside, there's a purpose for you going outside. Hope that makes sense.
When I was in seminary, I used to only wear slides 12 months of the year, slippers and socks and shorts and a sweatshirt. And one time I actually asked one of my professors, and all the professors there would wear suits. And I mean, some of the students did too, but I was infamous. What does that mean? I was famous. No, take that out, Brian. Thank you. For wearing.
Incredulous. You were incredulous.
I was, super.
You were incorrigible.
No,
you were
I know
sophomoric.
No, I know that's a bad one. No, not that one. But I mean, my friends knew me as the person that didn't really care in terms of dress. And so I asked one of my professors, why do you dress in a suit every single time that you teach? And he said something to the effect of, because I respect and honor you, the position, and the material that I'm teaching. And that kind of struck a chord with me. I was like, oh, wow, that's very, very interesting, because even your dress represents what you're teaching, who you're teaching to, and the position that you're sitting in or standing in. And I thought that was really interesting. And I think this is a helpful discussion because a lot of us don't really think about that when we get ready for church Sunday morning, when we're getting ready to, when we're getting dressed, when we are getting dressed for Monday morning, Tuesday, Wednesday, whatever it might be. We don't think about the glory of God. We think about, like you said, comfort. We think about what color works best. We think about how hot is it? How cold is it? We don't really think about, does this glorify God? And so that's a really helpful thing for us to, I think through. I'm curious though, because everyone gets dressed. Is there maybe some advice, maybe some questions that we can reflect on as we pick our outfits? And this might seem like a silly question, but I do think it's important because we get dressed every day. Are there some things that we should be thinking through as we are getting dressed? Because, in the Bible it says whether we eat or drink, we do all for the glory of God, so that we can glorify God better.
Yeah, I think that's whatever your professor said, that was good and that was wise. If we think about it, go back to the Old Testament times, and when the high priest had to dress, he didn't dress in t-shirt and shorts.
No.
He dressed in an ephod, and that was an elaborate dress where there was a breastplate, there were things on his shoulders. He had like even tassels on the edge of his robes. There are all these things before he even began to go in to the Holy of Holies. So we are also called to be a royal priesthood. And so that should affect your mind when you are dressing for certain occasions, especially when it comes to worship. And so, I make fun of Crocs a lot,
Yeah.
but thankfully, not a lot of people wear Crocs. Maybe some do, but I don't notice. But I don't think Crocs is an appropriate dress for Sunday. I know someone who loves Crocs because they're so comfortable
Mhm.
and their feet smell. So they need that ventilation.
Yeah.
But his wife urges him not to wear Crocs, so he doesn't wear them on Sunday.
Mm.
What a good wife that is! But
Yeah. Yeah.
this man has a prize of a wife in that sense,
Mhm.
a wise wife. But those are things that we can think about. You are a royal priesthood, as it says in First Peter, and if you're a royal priesthood and you know how priests dress in the Old Testament, that should at least inform you on maybe the trajectory of your dress. Should it simply be for comfort? Should it simply be for, let's say, garnering attention from your neighbor?
Mhm.
Or should it really be to glorify God in your outer appearance as your inner character is developed and you're adorning yourself with godliness? And so hopefully it's the latter thing that we talked about and that I mentioned, that's what we want to dress ourselves in. And that's why I don't think you wear slides as much now. But
Yeah.
looking back, I think, people who wear suits may not have been better students than you, but what they wanted to do was they wanted to show respect reciprocally, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a great thing, to honor your teacher, to honor the material that you're learning. It's not some small thing. You're not learning something, insignificant, but this is something heavy that you're learning, and your dress is there to reflect that.
Thank you for that, Pastor Eugene. And I think this really is helpful. Like I said, everyone gets dressed. We're all thinking of something as we are picking our outfit. Maybe not me, to be honest. I don't think about anything when I'm getting dressed, but we are thinking for a function, a temperature, a climate, whatever, an occasion. But do we think about the glory of God as we're getting dressed? And I think that's a great thing to think about just practically as we live our day-to-day lives. Thank you for that, Pastor Eugene. And we thank you for listening to this episode of the Dear Church podcast. And I do have to actually say, thank you for praying for our CGS Summer School. It was due to your prayers and God's faithfulness and answering those prayers that everything went well. And it was great. So we thank you for praying. Join us next week as we talk about science. I'm a bit of a scientist myself.
Scientist?
Yes, I dabble in science.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'll have a lot of things to say next week. Anyway, tune in next week to find out. Christian and the science. And science. We hope and pray that this has been a blessing in your ears. Fight the good fight. Finish the race. Keep the faith.
Peace.